All right, Chelsea, one-on-one. I'm so excited for this. You are obviously an icon, an amazing role model for so many people. I want to kick it off, though, with your book, because if people don't know, you've written a book uh, around women in sport, and you said raising role models and being really visible. It's such an important aspect. I was a four-time Olympian in ice hockey, saw the impact you can have being visible. My good friend Billie Jean King always says, if you can see it, you can be it. And you've created a way for people to see it. Real quickly, I'm just going to read out loud the excerpt. Throughout history, in every sport at all levels, women athletes have been told they were never going to be fast enough, strong enough, or good enough. In this book, Chelsea Clinton introduces women athletes who have excelled in their sports because of their passion, skills, and persistence. Tell me about the book. Why did you write it? What's the impact you hope to make in doing something like this?
So Angela, I've always loved sports. I mean, I never had an iota of the talent that you have, but I've always loved sports. I loved playing sports as a kid. I loved watching sports as a kid. I actually had like pretty strict like guidelines on how much TV I was able to consume as a kid, although somehow, thankfully, sports were an exception. So kind of building on what I was just saying to Scott, like I got to watch so much sports with my pop-up and my grandma, my parents on the weekends. We always watched like, I mean, you know, back when it was just 16 days, like the 16 days of the Olympics, like, you know, whenever it was kind of Olympic times in summer, winter. And even though I knew from a fairly like early age that I was never going to be, you know, on an Olympic team, I just think like the values and the practice of those values in sports is really important for kids. You know, the practice of persistence, the practice of teamwork, of collaboration, of being able to work things out together. The practice of like being both yourself and part of a team and learning how to navigate that. So I just am so thankful for all of the sports in my life that my parents really encouraged me to do, supported me in doing, always cheered me on, even when I was like, you know, not maybe the best on the team. Were just invaluable lessons for me. And then watching women play sports was really important to me. I have this vivid memory of watching FloJo in the 1988 Seoul Olympics, like obliterate the Olympic and the world records in the 100 and the 200 meter. And Angela, watching her win with just so much like joy and pride, and that it was unapologetic. Like, I don't think I'd really seen that as a kid, as a little girl in Little Rock, Arkansas. Like a woman, like be victorious in that way. It had a really profound impact on me.
Yeah. Being a hockey player, I had to look up to the men, the NHL, but it's amazing to hear that FloJo and just having people that you could emulate that look and feel like you. Is that part of the impetus? I know you had, this is one of a series of She Persisted books, but what I'm hearing is you saw it, you felt it, you know what being an athlete and just participating at any level, the impact that you can have in life. Is that really what drove you to write the book around sports? I mean, you've got the background.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you were quoting Billie Jean King earlier, and I think of something that, Sally Ride, who's someone else I just so admired as a kid, still kind of very much look up to, said, which is that, it's hard to imagine what you can't see. And I think that as a parent now, I feel that way so keenly. And I was really surprised actually when, my daughter was, not yet 2, but I could see that she was like really starting to engage with the books, like, not just like eating them, but like looking at them, like staring at them with like a little bit more, I think, like, cognitive engagement. And then definitely like as she got, as she got a little bit older, and I just realized, especially after our son Aiden was born, like how many picture books for kids were centered on boy characters, or were told from a boy perspective. How many of even like the animal books had like a boy frog or a boy cow. And so I just really I didn't want my kids to grow up with that imagination gap. I wanted to have like real inspiring examples kind of in their books that they would see and that they would look up to. And I thought that was really important for my son and now my sons, as well as my daughter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I gotta throw this out there. I wrote a book when I was 24 because there was one other female sports book. It was by Mia Hamm. And I said, this is crazy. Like, there are boys, there are girls that need to look up to women and see these inspiring stories. And so it's great that you've, again, created a way for young boys and young girls to see these amazing female role models. You are a investor now. You've taken it a step further. You're an investor in Washington Spirit. We're good friends with them in the National Women's Soccer League. You're not just writing, but you're putting your money where your mouth is. You're an investor. Tell me what led you to that investment and your belief in women's soccer and women's sports at large.
I mean, I've always loved soccer. I was lucky enough to go to the Men's World Cup when it was in the United States when I was a little girl, and grew up watching World Cup soccer, Men's World Cup soccer, then Women's World Cup soccer, and was a huge fan of college soccer at Stanford when I was at Stanford. And so kind of fast forward to kind of last year, one of my really good friends was investing in the Washington Spirit and asked if I wanted to participate. And I don't even think the question had left his mouth before I said yes. What can I do? How can I support this? Admittedly, I am a New Yorker now, but DC is very close to my heart as a place where I grew up and where I, made and still have so many wonderful friends. And admittedly, we don't have a women's soccer team in New York. Hint, hint to anyone who's listening. And so I just thought if I can be part of trying to help close the imagination gap for little girls in DC and kind of others who may be watching, I'm just so honored and privileged to be able to do that and to be part of not just making, but proving the case that there is a business behind women's sports, and a really good business, especially in the sport that is the single most played sport by girls in America, soccer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Our company at Sports Innovation Lab is studying the whole market through a project called the Fan Project. And we are going to put out a report next month that talks about the business case. Your point exactly. This isn't just, the right thing to do or corporate social responsibility or brand, it's about the business, which I'm really excited about. Tell me a little bit more about your experience in how you've taken the lessons you've learned from sports into the rest of your life. Again, why you're so passionate about having young boys, young girls watch the Washington Spirit, watch soccer, read your book. What are those intangibles that you're, so passionate about that maybe you use in your life today?
So I think, Angela, there is so much we can learn by watching sports, especially I think when we do feel connected to the sport because it's just one that we particularly love, or a team that we love, the way that my pop loved the Washington Bears, or clearly the way that, the Chicago Bears, or the way that you clearly not only love but excelled at hockey, and the way that I love and never excelled at soccer. And so
you're a ballet dancer, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I was, I did have more talent there than on the soccer field, albeit only maybe by a margin. And so, I think we can just see the extraordinary things that human beings can achieve, with our bodies in individual sports, kind of with our bodies and our minds and our hearts working with others, and in team sports. And I think that for those of us who, again, didn't have the talent, Angela, that you had, I also think there's just a really important lesson of learning to love things that we're not great at. I still love, I love kicking a soccer ball around with my kids now. I love helping my daughter work on her footwork to the best of my abilities when we're in COVID. And so she's not on a soccer team at the moment. And it just gives me so much joy to share this love with her that I thankfully was able to find as a kid, even though I wasn't good. I mean, at school, I could like work hard and I would like, oh, I would get an A. Like soccer, I work hard and I'd get, I don't know, like a C or whatever the equivalent is. Like, but that's okay because I still, my love and my joy superseded kind of the absence of real skill. And I think there's actually a real value to that, to kind of being able to find ways to love things where we may not be the best. And I think that's actually a pretty important skill for kids, especially to learn, and to learn still how to persist in doing the best we can, even if like we're not going to win first place, because we still should always be doing the best we can. And that we know that that is our best, even if it's not kind of the best at the end of the race.
Yeah, no, Chelsea, I totally agree. Life is a team sport. When I failed, I learned more about myself than even when we were able to be successful, and just those almost like a safe place to succeed, fail, learn about goals, learn about team. It's amazing what I take away now from what, apply the intangibles in life. Getting back to your book, I'm curious if there's a story in here that everyone has to know. You mentioned FloJo already. I was read the book in advance of, my favorite obviously is the Lamoureux twins, because they played hockey and won a gold medal in Pyeongchang, and I actually got to give them that medal. Is there a story in there that people that haven't read the book, like your mind was blown and you're like, this story has to be in this book? There's a woman out there that you don't play favorites, but play favorites. Like what's one story that you're like, everyone has to know about this person?
Well, I've thought about Wilma Rudolph so much recently because she overcame so many infectious diseases as a kid. She really just, almost didn't survive as a kid at many moments because she got so very sick. And thankfully, she had family, and her mom especially, who just never gave up and always ensured that her daughter was going to get the medical care that she needed. And she had polio, and she had to wear leg braces for many years. And it was watching her her older brother and some of their friends like play basketball, but that really gave her this goal of like, oh, like I'm going to make my legs strong enough so I can play basketball. I can compete against them. And clearly she more than did. As she then kind of went on to, at the time be the fastest woman in the world and really be the first Black American woman that many Americans, especially white Americans, saw win a gold medal. And she, I think, is such an extraordinary figure for so many reasons, but I have thought about her a lot during COVID because I think her story, I hope her story would have a special kind of resonance for kids now who are living against the backdrop of the kind of biggest pandemic, in many generations. And just to know that she still was able to persevere over the kind of infections that shadowed her early life, that really threatened her early life. I hope that story is, particularly encouraging. And I guess the other one I might mention quickly is Christy Yamaguchi, who started to skate because her older sister skated. And so I think about that, with my kids now. I'm like, oh, I need to make sure they're all doing the same activities, because like who knows like, when they're going to find like their passion, and hopefully that passion is matched with talent.
Yeah. Great stories in there. Thank you for helping them bring to life those stories. And wondering your thoughts on, your mother's a role model of mine. I think she's amazing, and as are you. A lot of talk about pay equality, and sports is really a microcosm of society. It reflects how we value things. And you just mentioned Rudolph and her struggle and opening doors and potential racial barriers and exposure. Do you have any other, reflections on how sport is a reflection of society, and why the women's game, the women's market is something we should really pay attention to and invest in and think about as a way to break through those barriers, or just be very visible in terms of reflecting how we might value women in general? Again, just overall thoughts on sports as a microcosm, and I'm sure we could talk for hours on this, but.
Well, clearly, I deeply believe in pay equity and strongly support the national women's soccer team in their lawsuit and in their public campaign for kind of the more than merited kind of pay increases that they are asking for, demanding, as they should. And I do think there has been a real undervaluing of women in sports and women's sports, forever. I mean, I think that, when we think about the fact that, women control, depending on the survey, like 2/3 to 3/4 of household spending, the fact that like the world of kind of sports business wouldn't recognize that and then kind of orient and build for that as a market opportunity is, surprises me. And I think that part of doing that is giving kind of the respect and kind of coverage, recognition, and pay to women athletes. I mean, because the way that WNBA is often treated as second-class citizens is abhorrent. The way that often women Olympians are treated as second-class citizens, like pre and post Olympics, is abhorrent. And I think it's also especially, absurd, admittedly, from an American perspective, where I say, like, with all, like, due respect and gratitude, and like, I'll be cheering for you, to our like male athletes that'll be, at the Tokyo Olympics this summer. Like, by far and away, our, probably our most famous athlete going to the Olympics, like, most likely is Simone Biles, right? It's like, our American women are really the ones who have won, who have proven what's possible. I mean, goodness gracious, like, Simone Biles is the most decorated gymnast of all time. She continues to like literally prove what's possible with all the new moves that she's able to execute that then wind up being named after her.
Yeah.
So, I just think when you ask a question, Angela, about kind of the like fundamentally the lack of respect, we need both the cultural norms to shift and we need the business models to shift, and we need those to happen at the same time.
Yeah. I agree.
Angela, can I share an anecdote? And I'm curious if it resonates with both of you. Sort of this fatigue of always having to prove yourself. Angela, my son plays hockey, and Alana Blahosky, who was a fairly accomplished women's hockey player, one day was leading the group. And you could see some of the older boys were like, oh, do we have to really listen to her? It's a girl. So she stopped it right away and said, all right, if you guys can do what I'm about to do, then you get to pick how we spend the rest of our time together. If you can't do it, then you have to do what I say. Okay. So she went zipping up the ice, put her stick over her head. She stepped over it one way, she stepped over it backwards, and said, okay, now you guys try it. Yeah. And in unison, like 30 boys aged 7 to 14 fell on their faces. But she had to prove herself. It wasn't enough that she was I really remember that moment, because I can't help but think if that was a male hockey player, nobody would have questioned the credentials. Yeah. But she had to prove herself. Do you, Chelsea, sense that there's just a fatigue of having to be better, having to prove over and over again?
Yes. And, and I think Serena Williams comes to mind as someone who's spoken about this precisely, in really powerful, painfully powerful ways. Truly like one of the greatest athletes of all time. And yet even she still feels this way. So I do think, Scott, it's a real challenge. And I do think, there is this notion of a gender tax, on women, of just like how much harder women have to fight for opportunity, for recognition, whether that's from, male peers or sometimes, kids in a hockey class.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, we started it with Jessica Gelman telling a story of a CEO saying she had to be 70% better to get where she was. And we're going to have to end there, Angela. With those
I just want to, before we go though, Chelsea, I have to say thank you for having me in your house. Because that's the gold medal, 98, the first women's hockey gold medal. Your father graciously invited all the Olympians, as you know, and I'm sure you got to meet many. But thanks for having me in your house, and thank you. I just want to say wholeheartedly for what you're doing for women in sport, your investment in women's sport, the book that you wrote, the visibility being here today. It means a lot by having someone like yourself, again, advocate on behalf. We need more women like you, more men as well like you to be out there. So thanks for having this
Thanks
conversation.
so much, Angela. And thank you, Scott.